Zack and Addie found their home and each other in New Orleans, sucked in by its free-living bohemian culture and easygoing lifestyle. Their southern fried romance was destined for destruction, pulsated in the thick, stale humidity of the French Quarter, and born in the deathly heat of an apocalyptic storm so fierce many thought the city would never recover. And in a lot of ways it hasn't. They were two souls bound together by fear and addiction, and violently split apart by abuse and gruesome, ugly death. Theirs is a sad tale of an aspiring poet and her wounded soldier, of mental illness, suicide, and murder. This is Zack and Addie's story. Addie Hall was a free-spirited, feisty-tempered, independent artist who found herself in bohemian New Orleans after a rough life in the Northeast states. A poet, artist, dancer, and French Quarter bartender with a host of friends, Addie Hall was weary of relationships with men because of the abuse she experienced in her past. She rode her bike around the quarter to get where she needed to go, and to her job as bartender at the Spotted Cat. She called herself a Puerto Rican, someone who belonged in and was part of the French Quarter. Life as an artist is never easy, though. You try to balance artistic expression with your surroundings and lifestyle, and you are never sure where the pieces fit together. Addie fit there right in the middle, trying to find herself and her muse, all the while battling her own demons and addictions. Zack Bowen was a charismatic, charming, and good-looking young man who left an impression on everyone he met. He grew up in California and had the laid-back attitude that comes from growing up on the sunny Pacific beaches. Zack married young, to a woman 10 years his senior named Lana. They had 2 children together, and in order to care for them, he joined the army for the benefits it could provide. When Lana took the kids and decided to leave him, Zack was devastated and lonely. He found odd jobs around the French Quarter after being generally discharged subsequent to his tours overseas in Iraq and Kosovo. Zack was a war hero suffering from severe PTSD who desperately needed help that he never found. Addie met Zack while they were both bartending in the French Quarter. She liked to give him a hard time and play the mean girl as a way of flirting, but really it was just a test to see what he could handle. Addie had an ugly side to her, suffering from bipolar disorder and irregularly taking the medication to treat her mental illness. This caused angry, uncontrolled outbursts. Many of Zack and Addie's friends remember the outrageous fights they would get into. A tumultuous relationship from the start, fueled by drugs and alcohol, Zack and Addie were destined for destruction. Dating for weeks before Katrina came into view, Zack and Addie decided to stick out the Category 5 hurricane together at her apartment. Zack had every intention of leaving the city and staying with his estranged wife, Lana, and their kids, so he could get out of the storm. The mass exodus was so severe and forewarned that Lana even welcomed Zack's girlfriend, Addie. But Addie's desire for independence and a life all her own with her new boyfriend far exceeded any need she had to leave the city. Zack went to check on Addie and couldn't leave her, and they decided to weather the storm together in her apartment. Amid the storm and flickering lights, they fell deeply in love and made a life for themselves in the weeks following the destruction in the empty French Quarter. They were inseparable from that point forward. The apocalyptic Category 5 hurricane hit New Orleans directly, leaving catastrophic flooding and nearly 2,000 fatalities in its wake. But the majority of the historic French Quarter was unscathed, save for fallen tree limbs, broken signage, and scattered debris. Zack and Addie gathered the few people that waited out the storm and collectively made dinners together over campfire, drank booze out of dirty coolers, and stayed up late singing songs and looking up at the stars they couldn't see before because of the street lights and brightness of the city. They were so swept up in the romance of everything that they were completely oblivious to the goings-on just blocks away at the Superdome and surrounding areas. Zack and Addie were even photographed for national magazines and newspapers in the wake of the devastating storm, being interviewed about their choice to stay in the city. They felt like king and queen of the quarter for a time. When reality set back in, the lights in the city turned back on, the stars disappeared, and the real cleanup began. Zack and Addie were forced back into a lifestyle they weren't ready to experience again. Bills piled up, job schedules came back, responsibilities returned. The bonfire in the middle of their street that they cooked on was reduced to ash. Addie just wanted Zack. She didn't want his life or responsibility of his children and ex-wife. The honeymoon was over, and the physical and emotional pain of abuse was only mildly numbed by the vast amounts of alcohol and drugs they began to consume over the months to come. Violent fights erupted, and Zack and Addie began to drift apart. Their solution to reigniting their passion, getting a new apartment together and starting over from scratch. They walked down Rampart Street and came across a for rent sign. An apartment above the famed Voodoo Temple at the time was available immediately, and with months' worth of tips in their pockets, they made an offer right away and moved in. No sooner did they unpack but a few boxes than Addie went to the landlord and asked that the lease be in her name and her name only. She discovered that Zack was cheating on her and decided that was the last straw. Considering her past with men, this was an end-all be-all situation, and their relationship was over. The landlord wrote a handwritten contract and asked that Addie sort it all out in hopes they would get back together. Once Zack learned of this deception, he became angry and inconsolable. At around 1:00 a.m. on Thursday, October 5th, 2006, Zack strangled his girlfriend Addie Hall to death. In a drunken stupor, he fell asleep next to her corpse on the futon, committed necrophilia, and got up the next day and went to work. His co-workers remember him acting out of sorts, wearing sunglasses and a hat, and becoming very quiet. Over the next several days, Zack cut up Addie's body in their bathtub with a hacksaw and knife, and dispersed the pieces of her corpse into and on top of the stove for cooking, as well as in the refrigerator. He gave her a haircut and placed her head inside of a pot on the front of the stove, placed her small feet and hands inside of another pot on the back burner of the stove, her legs and arms in a roasting pan inside the oven, and finally, her torso in a black plastic trash bag in the fridge to be dealt with later. Apparently, his intentions were to separate bone from flesh as a means to more easily handle the disposing of her body. Many at the time said there was intentions of cannibalism, but the autopsy reports confirmed there were no signs of it. Addie's friends and co-workers asked where she was when they saw or called Zack. He told them she left him and went back to North Carolina. Some were surprised as they knew how much she loved New Orleans and couldn't see her leaving, while others were not shocked, knowing that Addie could be very unpredictable and have a tendency to run away from situations out of her control. Little did they know that Zack knew exactly where she was and what he had done to her. On Tuesday evening, October 17, 2006, nearly 2 weeks after the murder and dismemberment of his girlfriend Addie Hall, Zack Bowen committed one more act of violence by jumping to his own death from the 7th floor of the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel. He left a handwritten note and his army dog tags inside of a plastic bag in his back pocket, and the gate keys to Addie's apartment in his front pocket. This is how the letter in Zack Bowen's pocket started out.
This is not accidental. I had to take my own life to pay for the one I took. If you send a patrol car to 826 Narrows Rampart, you will find the dismembered corpse of my girlfriend Addie in the oven, on the stove, and in the fridge, and a full signed confession from myself. Zack Bowen.
The letter to police only led detectives to the home of Addie and Zack's landlord for questioning. Once they were pointed in the right direction, they quickly discovered that the contents of Zack's letter was in fact true. A sad tableau of unopened boxes and broken dreams awaited as they walked into the disheveled apartment. The first thing they noticed was the temperature and lack of smell. The air conditioning was set to 60 degrees and on full blast, cold like a meat locker. There was no smell of rotting flesh, and the bathroom was clean of any lingering blood. On the walls were the silver-colored spray-painted words of, "I love her," "I'm a total failure," and finally, "Look in the oven," with an arrow pointing to the stove door. What the detectives discovered next is something I am sure will stay with them the rest of their lives as they opened pot covers and a heavy refrigerator door. At the scene of Addie's murder, police found her journal with writings added from Zack.
Today is Monday, 16 October, 2 a.m. I killed her at 1 a.m. Thursday, 5th October. I very calmly strangled her. It was very quick. Halfway through the task, I stopped and thought about what I was doing. The decision to halt the first idea and move to Plan B, the crime scene you are now in, came after a while. I scared myself, not by the action of calmly strangling the woman I've loved for 1.5 years, and then desecrating her body, but by my entire lack of remorse. I've known for forever how horrible of a person I am. Ask anyone, and decided to quit my jobs and spend the $1,500 cash I had being happy until I killed myself. So that's what I did. Good food, good drugs, good strippers, good friends, and any loose ends I may have had. I didn't contact any of my family, so that'll explain the shock, and had a fantastic time living out my days. It's just about time now.
Zack was struggling with PTSD. He was traumatized by the city post-Katrina. Military control, general destruction, and vast death. This had a profound effect on his state of mind, which was already in a sensitive place. As the days, weeks, and months grew on, severe alcohol and drug abuse, and with compounding symptoms that were left untreated, Zack was ultimately defeated by his own demons. Days before Zack Bowen murdered Addie Hall, they moved into the infamous apartment at 826 North Rampart Street, above Priestess Miriam's voodoo spiritual temple, a well-respected and cultural establishment of New Orleans. Many would claim later that the dark voodoo history of the location had something to do with Zack's overwhelming mental illness and the violent outbursts of their relationship's final demise. It is pure coincidence that these unrelated matters aligned. Voodoo in general is actually a healing and kind spiritual practice that is well respected in the city. Darkness has little to do with it. Addie Hall was a murder victim, a complicated matter, but simply put, a case of severe domestic abuse turned criminal, and there's nothing supernatural about that fact. Zack's own personal demons took over what was left of his sanity and caused him to end the life of his girlfriend and, eventually, himself.